As the faint clinking of glasses and the low murmur of conversations filled the dim haze of the Sapphire Room, the upscale cocktail bar where I had worked for 8 months, a dull ache throbbed through my fingers after hours of shaking martinis, and a lingering pulse pressed against the back of my right temple, reminding me that there were still 3 more hours until closing time, 3 more hours before I could slip off these punishing heels and collapse into the sagging bed in my rundown apartment. I stretched slightly and straightened the napkins and glasses on the bar counter, trying to maintain a polished appearance, even though every part of me felt as though it were unraveling. Seattle was deep in its rainy season, and the damp cold drifting in from the street had packed the bar to its brim. Men in tailored suits and women in silk dresses and red lipstick. The soft hum of jazz woven through the sound of ice tapping against crystal. All of it making this place feel like it existed in a world separate from anything outside. I once believed working here was a step forward. The Sapphire Room was famous as a gathering place for the affluent, the executives, the writers, the artists, and the nameless wealthy who preferred to hover in the shadows. But after 8 months behind the counter, I had learned one truth: money never came with peace. The patrons here were far more complicated than I had imagined, and far more dangerous than I ever wanted to know. I did not have many choices anyway. My mother was in a nursing home in the southern part of the city, surviving on health insurance and the delayed payments I scrambled to piece together. My younger brother Zachary was in his final year of college in another state, and I could not let him drop out because of tuition. I had once studied nursing, but 3 years earlier, when my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I left school to care for her. The dream of wearing a nurse's uniform now lived only on a bored, small piece of paper taped to the door of my refrigerator. I did not complain, but there were nights like this, when the repetitive strains of music and the scent of strong liquor soaking into my hair made me feel as though I were dissolving into the very walls of this room. Every customer was a small performance, a face I had to remember, a story I had to listen to without allowing a single honest word of my own to slip out. "Emily, table 12 needs service." Marco, the night manager, spoke from right behind me, his voice cutting through the haze. He passed by, the lingering scent of sandalwood mixed with something synthetic trailing after him even as he walked away. I nodded, picked up a black tray and a napkin, and exhaled quietly. Table 12 sat in the most secluded corner of the bar, a luxurious booth near the back exit where the light softened and the noise thinned. It was reserved only for particular customers, the ones who never needed a reservation yet always had, premium liquor waiting and a private corner guaranteed. I had not seen anyone walk in, but that meant nothing. People with real power slipped through the small door in the alley behind us, far from curious eyes. I glanced at the clock. 2 hours and 45 minutes left. With luck, whoever was at table 12 would order 1 drink and leave. If not, I would be standing on these aching feet much longer. I adjusted my hair, lifted the tray, and made my way toward the dim corner where everything was about to begin without my slightest awareness. If you can feel the cold breath and the mysterious gaze coming from table 12, the way I do, please subscribe to our channel, press like, and share this video so we can keep bringing you gripping and dramatic stories every day. And where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment with your city or your country so I know which corner of this wide world Emily's journey has reached. As I approached, a thin current of cold air brushed my skin, a chill that did not come from the air conditioning. Table 12 was now occupied, though less than 5 minutes earlier it had been completely empty. He sat alone, leaning back into the booth, one hand resting lightly on the polished walnut table, the hand long-fingered, strong, elegant, with a simple platinum ring catching the soft glow of the hanging lamp overhead. I could not see his face clearly at first, but something in the air around him made me slow down, as if the very molecules surrounding him vibrated at a different frequency, heavier, sharper, more charged. When I reached the table, he lifted his head, and my heartbeat slipped out of rhythm for just a moment. His eyes were amber, deep like well-aged bourbon, with streaks of gold flickering in the low light. That gaze locked onto me and did not waver, as though he were memorizing every line of my face. He looked to be somewhere between his mid-30s and nearly 40, with a firm, sculpted face, high, cheekbones, a strong jaw, black hair neatly cut with close-shaved sides like an officer, the top slightly longer and brushed back with ease. A thin scar, faint as a paper cut, traced from the bone of his left jaw up toward his ear, almost invisible unless one stood close. I steadied myself, lowering my head slightly. "Good evening. Thank you for choosing the Sapphire Room." My voice came out softer than usual, with a slight tremor beneath it. He did not smile. He did not blink. "Scotch. Neat. The most expensive you have." His voice was low, smooth like river stones under flowing water, quiet yet carrying a weight that sent a chill down my spine. "Yes, of course. I will be right back." I turned quickly, heading toward the bar, my heart pounding as though I had run a long distance. When I glanced toward the counter, Marco was staring at me, his expression unusually tense. The manager, who was usually cold as steel, looked tonight as though he had just seen a ghost. "Is everything all right, Emily?" he asked as he reached for the top shelf where the bottle of 25-year Glenlivet rested. I nodded, though a question tightened in my chest. "Marco, who is sitting at table 12, I asked. He shot a quick glance toward the shadowed corner, then looked at me again, his face unreadable. "Not your business. Serve him quickly and do not linger." I held my breath, nodded, and took the glass he handed me, my palms already turning cold. When I returned with the scotch, I realized his eyes had never left me. It felt as though every movement I made, every breath I took, unfolded under his watch. I set the glass down gently, keeping the tray angled to block Marco's view. His fingers brushed mine when he took the drink, a touch deliberate yet unhurried. "Thank you," he said, his eyes dropping to the small name tag pinned to my blouse. "Emily." The way he spoke my name felt like he was tasting it, letting each syllable linger like a whispered secret in the night. A shiver ran along my spine. I should have stepped away. I should have walked back to the bar where the light, the noise, and Marco's wary stare waited. But I remained there, drawn to him the way a moth is drawn to flame. "May I get you anything else?" I asked, fighting the tremble in my voice. A brief smile flickered, swift as a passing shadow across his face. "Not for now." I nodded, backed away, and turned. Yet even as I disappeared behind the bar, I knew that gaze remained fixed on me, like a promise or a warning. For the next full hour, through the constant clatter of glasses and the warm gold glow of the lights, I could still feel it. The presence of the man at table 12, a quiet shadow slipping into my heart, slow but certain, and I had no idea that tonight was the beginning of everything. His scotch remained almost untouched. Through the entire hour that slipped by beneath the pressure of non-stop drink orders, the endless murmur of jazz, and the sluggish golden light drifting across the counter, I still felt his gaze on me. Every time I glanced toward table 12, he was there, unmoving like a carved figure, except for his eyes, which were alive, sharp, burning. Damien. I did not know his name then, but looking back, I think my body sensed it long before my mind did. Every nerve in me felt strung tight like a drawn violin string, though I could not have explained why, not until the front door swung open. 3 men stepped inside, nothing remarkable at first glance, dressed in dark suits with pale gray ties, their gait ordinary enough to blend into any business function happening in downtown Seattle. But I knew immediately. One of them swept the room with a quick, practiced glance, his eyes skimming over each table. The second lifted a hand to his ear, and in the soft light I caught the faint glint of a wire-thin earpiece. The tallest of the 3 hesitated for the briefest beat when his gaze locked onto table 12. I swallowed hard. Damien remained perfectly still, his drink untouched. I could not say how I knew they were not normal patrons. Maybe instinct, maybe the way I had grown up in a neighborhood where a person's posture and eyes could tell you exactly what they were here for. I saw Marco frozen beside the register, whispering something to another staff member, then turning toward me with a warning carved into his expression. "Emily, take a 10-minute break." His voice carried just loud enough, at just the right moment, and I understood instantly that I was not meant to ask questions, but my feet would not move. One of the 3 men slid a hand inside his jacket. The gesture was slow, discreet, calculated, and I recognized that movement, a gun, not meant for shooting inside the bar, but ready if the target ran. My hands trembled. I grabbed a cloth napkin from the drawer beneath the counter and snatched a pen. My hand wrote without consulting my mind, only 2 lines. "They know you are here. Leave now." I poured another scotch, placed the folded napkin beneath its base, as if it were a simple piece of decoration, inhaled deeply, and walked toward table 12. Damien watched me approach, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. He neither looked surprised nor questioned anything. When I set the drink down, his hand touched mine again, lingering for a controlled heartbeat. His gaze drifted to the napkin, then returned to my face. "Thank you, Emily." His voice was low and steady, but this time it carried a different undertone, not gratitude for the drink, but for what I had just done. I turned away, my heart pounding so hard my head felt light. The 3 men were closing in on table 12. I pretended to wipe the counter, forcing myself not to look back. For a suspended moment, the entire room fell strangely silent. Everything seemed to slow. I counted 5 heartbeats before footsteps sounded behind me. One of the men stopped at my side. "Excuse me, miss." "The man sitting over there. When did he leave?" I turned, trying to keep my eyes calm. I was serving other customers. I did not notice. I did not know how Damien disappeared. But when I lifted my head, table 12 was empty. The old glass remained. The new one was gone. The napkin was gone. Only the air felt dense, as if stirred, and then frozen again. Damien was gone, leaving nothing but a cold hollow in his place. But I knew I had become part of something larger than myself, and I knew it would not end here. One of the 3 men approached the bar quietly, his steps controlled, his gaze sharp as a blade. He did not reach for a card, did not give his name, but I knew exactly who he was. The way he stood, the way his eyes fixed on my face as though he had memorized every contour before stepping inside. The tallest of them, with carefully groomed silver at his temples, signaled the others to spread out, one heading toward the restrooms, the other toward the kitchen as if strolling. He stopped only a few steps from me, placing his hand on the counter as if laying a file down in front of me. "You are Emily Carter, correct?" I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes. Is something wrong?" He tilted his head slightly, a thin smile touching his mouth but never reaching his eyes. "The man at table 12 has already left." I glanced quickly toward the booth. Empty. The old drink still sat there, traces of scotch clinging to the sides of the glass. I did not see him go. I was busy with other tables. He watched me for several seconds, then lowered his voice so only I would hear. "Do you know who he is?" I shook my head. "I do not know his name. I only serve drinks, the same as every night." He did not look away, as though reading each thought forming in my mind. I felt him searching for cracks. Marco stepped forward, his eyes razor-sharp with caution. "Is there a problem here?" The man turned to him and produced a badge. "Daniel Reeves, FBI. We have a few questions for Miss Carter." Marco stiffened for a heartbeat, then forced a professional smile. "She is working. Can this wait until after her shift?" Reeves checked his watch, then looked back at me. 5 minutes. We will not disrupt her work." I nodded, my legs moving almost on their own, as I followed him into the small staff room behind the bar. White walls, metal chairs, harsh fluorescent light. A place stripped of warmth, stripped of music, stripped of everything that might have softened the truth. Reeves remained standing, eyes fixed on me. "Did you have any unusual interaction with the man at table 12? I shook my head, my throat dry. He ordered a scotch, nothing more. "Did he behave strangely? Look around, act nervous, avoid eye contact?" "No. Actually..." I hesitated, and saw Reeves narrow his eyes. Actually, he was very calm, barely moved at all. "He did not drink his scotch. Did you hear his name?" "No." I answered quickly. He did not introduce himself, and I did not ask. Reeves was silent for a long moment, then pulled a photograph from his pocket and pushed it toward me. "Is this the man?" I glanced down. A black and white photo taken from a distance, but I recognized the lines of his face instantly, the thin scar, the amber eyes. I stared at the picture as though I had never seen it before. I am not sure. It might be the guest from tonight. I did not get a clear look. Reeves returned the photograph to his pocket. "If you remember anything else, contact us." He left a business card on the table, opened the door, and I was alone again with my heartbeat drumming against my ribs. When I returned to the bar, Marco was waiting. He pulled me to the corner of the counter, his voice low and tight. "What the hell did you just do?" My eyes widened. "I just served a drink." Like always. Marco stared at me, and in that moment his eyes were no longer those of a manager, but of someone who had seen far more danger than I ever imagined. His name is Damian Blackwood. He is not a regular customer. He owns a piece of this city, but not through legal means. The FBI has been tracking him for nearly a year. If you just helped him escape, they will come back, and next time, they will not be polite. I said nothing. I only looked at the abandoned glass on table 12 being cleared away, and felt my hand still cold from Damian's brief touch. No one knew what I had written on that napkin. But I knew, and if they came back, I would pay for it. I do not remember how I survived the last 3 hours of my shift. Everything felt slow, suffocating, as if the air itself had changed, shifting from oak and whiskey to the scent of tension and caution. Each time the door opened, I flinched. Every lingering look from a customer made me think of the photograph Reeves had shown me, and the knife-thin sharpness of his eyes. I tried to appear normal, pouring drinks, wiping counters, offering small smiles, but beneath that mask my heartbeat raced so fast I felt it straining against my ribs. Marco said nothing more after his warning. He only watched, his eyes tracking me every time. Someone walked near the now-cleared booth. When the clock reached 1 in the morning, I left through the back door, pulling on my coat, head lowered as I stepped quickly into the fog-drenched cold of the Seattle night. The alley behind the Sapphire Room was always darker than the rest of the neighborhood. A flickering, broken lamp cast uneven patches of light across the wet pavement. I clutched my bag tighter, walking faster, head down, but when I turned the corner toward the main street, I froze. Damian was standing there, leaning against the wall, his long charcoal coat draped over his shoulders, hands in his pockets, as if he had never left. He did not smile. He only watched me with the same unbroken gaze he had held since the moment we first met, a gaze that seemed to see straight through me and still remain. "What did they ask you?" His voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it carried through the empty alley with perfect clarity. I swallowed, not answering. The wind sliced through the narrow passage, carrying scraps of paper that brushed against my ankle. He stepped forward, not quickly, not threateningly, but with a certainty that left me unable to retreat. "You are not safe here anymore." I let out a short, brittle laugh. "I have never been safe anywhere." Damian stopped right in front of me, something like regret flickering briefly in his eyes. "I did not intend for you to get pulled into this. But when you wrote those words, you crossed a line." I looked at him, Marco's warning echoing in my mind. Damian Blackwood, the man the FBI had followed for nearly a year. A man who owned a piece of the city by means no one dared say aloud. He extended his hand, his palm open, not forcing, but offering the only path that did not end with danger snapping at my heels. "Come with me. I can keep you safe." I stared at his hand, then at his face. There was no fear there, no pleading, only a stillness, as if he knew I would take his hand eventually, unsure only of when. I lifted, my hand and touched his, and once again, that cold shock ran through me, though beneath it something warm flickered faintly, a tiny flame burning beneath ice. Damian opened the door of a black SUV parked a short distance away. I slid into the passenger seat, the seatbelt clicking shut with a sound that felt like a door closing behind my old life. He said little as we drove, only reaching forward to turn on a classic jazz track, the deep notes stretching out like a balm along my nerves. Seattle at night was still wet from the rain, droplets striking the windshield and catching the glow of streetlights like blurred falling stars. When the car turned into Queen Anne, a neighborhood of penthouses and lavish homes overlooking the bay, I began to understand I was heading somewhere far beyond any world I had known. Damian brought the SUV to a stop before a tall glass building, his keycard unlocking the gate with a soft electronic sigh. The garage was unsettlingly quiet. The private elevator carried us to the top floor, with only 2 buttons, the ground level and 48. When the doors opened, darkness and silence greeted us, a vast space lined with glass walls looking out over a sleeping city. Damian said nothing as he led me inside. He simply set his coat on a chair, turned toward me, and spoke a single sentence. "From now on, no one touches you without going through me." And I knew, in that moment, that my old life had truly ended. I could not sleep, not because the bed was too soft or the penthouse too quiet, but because my mind felt suspended between two worlds. One I had lived in for 28 years, and one I had just stepped into, a world from which there was no turning back. When the pale morning light filtered through the gray silk curtains, I was still lying on the long couch near the glass wall, watching the city below wrapped in its soft veil of mist. Damien was no longer in the living room. I heard the faint clink of dishes somewhere in the kitchen, and, when I walked closer, I found him pouring coffee, the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up to his elbows, his face carved like marble, though his eyes still carried a quiet vigilance. He handed me a cup of hot coffee without asking whether I wanted it, and we sat across from each other in silence for several minutes, as though waiting for the other to speak first. In the end, it was Damien who broke the stillness. "They will come back." His words carried no speculation. They were already a settled truth. I looked at him, my throat dry. "Because I wrote on that napkin," Damien nodded, "and because they know you saw him. You are no longer just an anonymous witness. You became part of it, even if only for a few seconds. They may call you in for questioning, follow you, even charge you if they need a convenient excuse. You can say you know nothing, you can stay silent, but they will not believe you." I lowered my head, my chest tightening. Damien continued, his voice low and measured, weighing each word with care. "You need to understand something. If you return to your old life, they will not leave you alone. They can go to your brother's college. They can go to your mother's nursing home. They will tear apart every corner of your life just to find something they can use to force a confession out of you, even when you have nothing to confess." I tightened my grip around the coffee cup, the heat searing my palms, but I did not let go. I said nothing. I simply looked at Damien, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of worry in the eyes of a man who seemed untouchable. "I know you do not trust me," he said quietly, "and you have every reason not to. But I am not the monster who kills without blinking the way they paint me. I have my own rules. Some people deserve punishment, some do not. And you are the first person in a very long time who made me stop and wonder if I can still be seen as human." My heart tightened, not because of what he said, but because of how he looked at me when he said it, as if he was neither apologizing nor making excuses, as if he simply placed his bare heart on the table for me to see, and whatever I chose to do with that truth, he would accept. Damien stood, walked to the window, and looked out, his tall frame outlined against the morning, solitary and stark. "You can walk out of here right now. I will not stop you. But if you stay, I will do everything in my power to keep you safe, even if it means breaking my own rules." I looked around the apartment, at the curtain swaying softly with the draft, the light spreading across the wooden floor, the abstract paintings on the wall, each detail chosen with care yet never ostentatious. And I thought of my tiny rented apartment where the roof leaked when it rained hard, the sharp smell of antiseptic in the nursing home where my mother lay, the look in my brother's eyes the night before he flew back to school, and I knew with a clarity that hurt I could not go back. I stood, slowly walked toward Damien, and when I placed my hand on his eyes widened just a fraction, revealing emotion for the first time since the night began. "I do not know what I am doing," I whispered, but I knew I did not want to do anything else, and I knew that in that moment I had chosen a path with no return. The next morning, when I woke in the wide bed covered with crisp white sheets, sunlight had already spilled through the floor-to-ceiling glass. There were no cars, no voices, only the strange stillness of a space too clean, too orderly, too controlled. Damien was not in the room. The penthouse, designed to be sealed off from the rest of the world, felt even more so now. I stepped barefoot onto the cool wooden floor, walked through the living room large enough to host a small concert, glanced at the paintings lining the hallway, abstract works with bold strokes and dark colors, mirroring the mood of the man who lived here. I did not know what I was searching for, maybe a hint of disorder, a trace of the real person inside this immaculate space. But everything was too perfect, almost soulless. The kitchen opened up with its long marble counter, its modern coffee machine, every appliance gleaming as if untouched. A faint scent lingered in the air, something I could not place, perhaps essential oil, perhaps the trace of Damien's clothes, but it brought him to mind instantly. I opened a door into an office lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with rare prints, economics, philosophy, and classic literature. On the desk was a closed laptop, a leather pen case, pristine sheets of paper, and a black Mont Blanc fountain pen. I did not touch anything, yet I knew eyes were watching. The feeling had followed me from the moment I stepped out of the bedroom, first a faint unease, then growing sharper, like an itch beneath the skin. I glanced at the corners of the ceiling, and though I saw nothing specific, I knew there were cameras, not necessarily to monitor me, perhaps to protect Damien, or both. In the living room, an embedded screen showed the feeds from exterior cameras, parking garage, elevator entrance, lower hallway, even a street-facing camera scanning the block outside. Each frame showed emptiness, calm, order. Yet the longer I looked, the more I felt like I was living inside a transparent glass cage, safe but exposed. I walked past a large black door with a brushed brass handle, no visible lock, yet it would not open. It must have been Damien's room. I had no intention of going in, but the mere existence of that door felt like a boundary between being tolerated and being contained. I returned to the living room and sat on the long sofa where he and I had sat the night before. In the silence, I looked through the glass at the view outside. Seattle from above looked small, peaceful, as if all my worries belonged to another life. But I knew this was no sanctuary. It was a fortress, and I was an outsider newly granted shelter. A soft click sounded as a door opened, and Damien walked in, wearing a fresh shirt, holding a paper bag from a nearby cafe. He set it on the table and looked at me with a gaze that carried careful observation. "You took a walk around," he said. I nodded. "Everything is too quiet." He sat across from me, pouring coffee into 2 gray ceramic cups. "This place is designed so no one can reach me without my knowing at least 10 minutes in advance." He said it evenly, as though explaining a home feature instead of admitting the entire space was a security system. I looked at him, wondering how long he had lived this way, how long he had kept everyone at a distance, how long he had spoken mostly through cameras and short, guarded conversations, how long it had been since he let a stranger like me step inside his world. I did not ask. But I understood among all the glass, all the protection, and all the unspoken rules, my presence here was the most unusual thing of all, and the most dangerous. That night, nothing remarkable happened, yet it was precisely that absence of incident that made everything feel strangely out of place. Damien did not leave the penthouse. He turned off all the security screens, dimmed the lights, and put on an old jazz record from the early 1960s, the sound drifting like a quiet breath across the vast space. I sat on the long sofa with a glass of red wine in hand, and he sat not far from me, leaning back in an armchair, the glow from a table lamp casting his face into deeper shadow, making him look as though he did not quite belong to this world. We remained silent for a long time. No questions, no explanations, only the sense that we were both learning how to breathe in each other's air. I was the one who spoke first. "How long have you lived alone?" Damien did not answer immediately. He turned his wine glass lightly, then set it down on the glass table. "Since my mother died." I lifted my eyes. His voice did not dip into sadness, did not tremble the way a grieving man might sound. It came out simply as fact, as though he had repeated it inside himself so many times that it had become part of his inner architecture. Her name was Eleanor, a high school literature teacher in Tacoma. She had only one child, me. My father left before I could speak. She raised me alone, in a small rented apartment beside a church. She never complained, never demanded anything. She worked 2 jobs at once, taught during the day, graded papers at night, and still tried to read enough books to make me believe the world held some form of justice. I said nothing, feeling something inside me soften. Damien continued, his gaze fixed on the far wall where the low light revealed only a fragment of shadow. "But when I was 18, she was diagnosed with cancer. She hid it from me for almost a year. By the time I found out, it was too late. I tried everything, took her to different clinics, borrowed money everywhere I could, did whatever was within my reach. But the doctors only shook their heads. 3 months later, I lost her. The apartment went silent. School fell apart. I stood in a world without anyone, without money, without faith." I asked him, almost whispering, "And then what?" Damien tilted his head slightly, his eyes shifting back to me but not truly seeing me. "Then I learned to live under a different set of rules. The rules of the street, of hidden deals, of strength. I started by collecting money for loan sharks, becoming the middleman for meetings no one wanted to acknowledge. I did not choose this life, Emily, but when the law does not protect someone like my mother, I had to create my own, another kind of justice. In that moment, I saw someone completely different from the cold figure at the bar. Not a kingpin, not a man hunted by the FBI, but a boy who had once cried into his knees in a dark room after losing his mother. A boy who was forced to build armor out of ruthlessness just to stay alive. I could not find the right words, only touched the rim of my glass, my throat tightening. Damien lowered his head, lacing his fingers, then looked up at me again. I looked at you in the sapphire room and knew you were not like the others. You did not pry, you did not pretend, you did not wear a mask of strength. You did the right thing when you wrote on that napkin, even though you had no idea whom you were defying. I pressed my lips together, held still beneath the weight of his words, because I realized that the moment he said them, a piece of the armor he had worn for years had cracked. And that fracture was more dangerous than any gun or threat, because when a man like Damien lets someone in, it is not merely a choice, it is a risk. And for the first time, I understood I was not here simply to hide. I had become part of the story he had kept guarded for so long. The next morning, I woke later than usual, not because I slept deeply, but because the image of Damien sitting in the dim light telling me about his mother kept replaying in my mind all night, each repetition echoing with a chilling calm, as though he had sealed his past away inside a locked drawer years ago. When I stepped out of the room, the penthouse was as quiet as ever, with only the faint smell of freshly brewed coffee drifting through the air. Damien was sitting at the long table near the window, his laptop open in front of him, the glow of the screen outlining the sharp angle of his face, focused and composed. He looked up when he saw me, not smiling, but with eyes softer than usual. "Do you want to do something more than just stay here and wait?" His question came unexpectedly, yet it did not sound like polite conversation. I sat across from him, tilting my head. "What do you mean?" Damien pushed the laptop aside and clasped his hands. "There is a club in the south end of the city, not like the Sapphire Room, but a place that serves as a kind of meeting point in the circles I deal with. It is missing a manager, someone trustworthy enough to handle money, staff, and the things I do not want to deal with directly." I stared at him, unsure what he was implying. "Why me? I have no experience." He watched me, not looking away this time. "Because you are different. You do not try to please anyone. You do not ask questions you know I will not answer. You do not speak much, but when you do, you mean it. And most importantly, you cannot be bought." I let out a soft laugh, half skeptical. "You are not afraid I might be working for the FBI?" Damien's mouth curved faintly. "If you were with them, you would not have written that warning on the napkin, and you would not still be here." I stayed quiet for several seconds, then asked again, "So the job? What exactly is it?" Damien leaned back, tapping his fingers lightly on the table. "You would manage day-to-day operations, keep things smooth, prevent conflicts. If anything goes beyond what you can handle, you just call me. You will not get involved in anything I do not want you touching." I thought of the murky moral moments at my old bar, the regulars who slipped money for silence, the people who came only to hide something, and I knew, no matter how hard Damien tried to keep me shielded, nothing in his world was ever perfectly clean. I took a slow breath, meeting his eyes. "If I agree, what do I need to begin?" Damien nodded as though he had expected this. From the drawer he pulled a black envelope containing a key, a bank card, and a new phone still unused. "You will need this. Your schedule, communication, everything will be encrypted. You cannot use your personal phone anymore." He handed me a slip of paper with the club's address and the time I was expected the following day. My palm grew damp around it. I knew I had taken another step deeper into Damien's world, a step not easily undone. But I also felt something else. Clearer than anything else, I was tired of living at the edges of other people's lives. And for the first time, someone trusted me not because I was pretty or agreeable, but because I was myself. Damien stood, walked toward me, and placed a hand gently on my shoulder. He said nothing, but his eyes said everything. He trusted me, and now I had to learn how to trust myself. I had not even begun to imagine what this new job would look like when that same evening Damien returned to the penthouse with tension etched sharply across his face. He did not say much, only gestured for me to gather a few essential belongings. "What is going on?" I asked, clutching the new phone he had given me. "And the job at the club?" "The plan has changed," Damien cut in, his voice low and absolute, leaving no room for argument. "They have traced some of my locations. The club is no longer safe. You cannot go there." He paused, looking directly into my eyes. "This entire city is no longer safe. We have to leave immediately." I did not ask another question. The urgency in his voice told me this was not a warning, it was a matter of survival. Only a few hours after that urgent warning, our flight to Malibu took off while the city of Seattle still slept beneath a heavy blanket of fog. Damien had not told me in advance. He sent only a single, brief, encrypted message to the new phone I had been given the day before. "Bring comfortable clothes. You will not need much." I assumed it was some kind of private meeting or a work-related trip, but when the black SUV stopped beside a compact private jet at a small airfield in the southern part of the city, I began to understand this was no ordinary journey. Damien waited for me beneath the slow-turning propeller blades. He wore a simple white shirt, no tie, no jacket, his eyes hidden beneath dark sunglasses, yet I could still feel the quiet weight in his posture. There were no bodyguards, no escorts, just him and me. We boarded the plane, flew through the clouds and a long stretch of sunlight pouring across the sky like honey, and landed at a small, coastal airport in Malibu. Just as the sun rose above the horizon, the air felt entirely different, warm, dry, tinged with the salt of the ocean. Every breath carried the taste of freedom, yet something inside me whispered that this place did not belong to me, that it was a fragment of someone else's memory. A convertible drove us away from town, winding along a narrow cliffside road. The sparse trees gave way to an open expanse, overlooking a deep blue sea. The house appeared in the distance, with sand-colored walls, low roofs, and floor-to-ceiling glass panels, built in an open style that made it look as though it had always been part of the coastline. Damien said nothing as we stepped inside. He only watched me take in the space, the wide living room with its long linen sofa, the unlit fireplace made of rough stone, the pale oak floor cool against my bare feet. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks rose steadily, like the heartbeat of the house. Everything here moved at a different rhythm, slow, grounded, stripped of the tension that surrounded his other life. There were no cameras in the corners, no surveillance screens, no tapping keyboards or urgent reports. I turned to Damien, almost unable to believe I was standing inside this quiet world. "This is where you come when you want to disappear." Damien nodded slightly, his voice barely louder than the ocean outside. "Only a few people know about this house. You are one of them now." I stepped onto the balcony, where a long wooden bench faced the open sea. Waves burst into white spray against the rocks, the water shimmering in sunlight as though dusted with glitter. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Only the shared presence of two people learning how to grow accustomed to silence after living too long in noise. Damien showed me around the house, from the small reading room with sliding glass doors opening onto the back garden, to the kitchen stocked with fresh ingredients, everything surprisingly fine, simple. Nothing like the world I imagined belonged to him. I found an old framed photograph on a wooden shelf, a black and white picture of a woman with gently curled hair holding a boy of about 6, both laughing, a rare joy in Damien's life that I had never seen reflected anywhere else. He saw me holding the photo and spoke quietly. "My mother, the only picture I still have. This house used to be hers." I set the frame back, feeling a quiet reverence rising in my chest. Damien had not brought me here simply to hide. He was showing me something no one else had ever been allowed to see. A fragment of truth, a piece of memory, a part of the man he had kept concealed behind hard edges for so many years. And I understood then that this house was not just a refuge, it was a silent invitation into the only place where Damien Blackwood felt safe. I did not think I could grow accustomed to such stillness. Yet after only a day in the seaside house, my entire body began to loosen in a way I could not explain. No more heels striking tile floors, no more order bells ringing, no reports to review, no one knocking with probing eyes or half-spoken questions. Only waves, ocean wind, and a strange man who always appeared with exactly what I needed before I knew how to ask for it. Damien did not control me the way I once feared. He did not ask what I was doing, did not follow my steps, did not give commands. Yet somehow breakfast appeared precisely when I walked out of the bedroom. The coffee brewed exactly the way I liked it. Not too strong, with a touch of almond milk. My clothes were washed, folded, and left on the long chair near the bedroom window, though I never saw anyone come in to do it. The kitchen was always stocked with fresh groceries, and each afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the ocean, Damien walked with me along the shoreline, saying little, only matching his steps to mine, steadying me with a gentle hand when the sand slipped beneath my feet. I began to realize that perhaps for the first time in years, I was being cared for without having to prove myself, without owing anyone, without paying for it, and that unsettled me more than his coldness ever had. Damien never asked about my past. He did not pry into my mother's illness, my brother's tuition, the reason I started working at 16, or why I flinched whenever someone touched my shoulder unexpectedly. Yet somehow I felt he knew all of it. Not from files or stories, but from the way he observed me. The way he never came too close when I was deep in thought. The way he set down a cup of tea beside my reading chair and walked away before I could thank him. Once, while I sat alone on the balcony reading a worn novel I found in the house's small library, Damien brought out a light blanket and draped it over my shoulders without saying a word. It was not gallantry, nor the habit of someone accustomed to caring for others. It felt like the instinct of a man who had lived a long time in solitude and understood that the smallest gestures could make someone feel seen. I found myself growing curious about him, not about the files the FBI held, not about how many clubs or properties were under hidden names, not about the meetings in the shadows. I wanted to know what kind of man Damien Blackwood truly was, the one who lived quietly in a house by the ocean, listened to old jazz, kept one cherished photograph of his mother, and cared for a woman he had no obligation to protect. One night, as we ate dinner beneath the simple wooden awning in the back, candlelight flickering across Damien's face, carving shifting shadows like brushstrokes in an oil painting, I finally asked him, "Why did you bring me here?" Damien looked up, set down his fork and knife, and studied me as though he had been waiting for the question for a long time. "Because I want you to know, I am not only a name in a sealed file, not only a man who survives by instinct. I remember soft things, the things I once had, and I am afraid that if I do not show you this place, someday I will forget I was ever that man." I did not know what to say in return, only felt a slow warmth spread through my chest, not love, not yet, but something like an unspoken bond with a man who, once invited into one's life, could never be erased like dust from a window pane. And I began to understand that no matter how cold he appeared on the surface, inside Damien was a heart still searching for the peace that had been stolen from him. And here, if only for a moment, he was trying to find it through me. That afternoon the sky settled into a gentle shade of pale orange as soft as silk, and the wind from the ocean drifted in cool and easy, carrying the scent of salt and the wild grasses growing along the roadside. Damien asked me to walk with him up the small hill behind the villa, where a narrow dirt path wound toward a rocky overlook almost no one knew about. I walked beside him, matching my smaller steps, to his longer stride, stopping now and then to pick up a pebble with a strange shape, or lift a sprig of wild lavender to my nose. Damien did not speak much, but the silence between us no longer felt heavy the way it had in the beginning. It felt instead like a breath, a space where both of us were allowed to exist without being pushed to reveal more than we were ready to share. When we reached the rocky ledge, we sat on a wide sun-warmed stone whose surface held the heat through the thin fabric of my pants. Damien took a small book from his jacket pocket, its leather spine worn smooth, its cover bare. He handed it to me without explanation, and when I opened it, I found pages of handwritten poems, the letters slanted and soft, some lines blurred as if touched by tears. I looked at him. "They were your mother's, weren't they?" He nodded. She loved the poetry of Sylvia Plath and Mary Oliver. She said poetry was the only way to keep the parts of herself she could never say aloud. I turned the pages slowly, read a passage in silence, then looked up. "Do you have a favorite?" Damien was quiet for a few seconds before pointing to a page with frayed edges. I glanced down. It was The Journey by Mary Oliver. I read it softly, each line sinking into the air gentled by the fading light. When I finished, Damien spoke in a voice so low it felt as if the wind might break it apart. She read that poem to me the night before she went into the hospital. She told me there are roads you must walk alone even when the storms are unbearable. And that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to keep moving even when you tremble. I looked at him, and for the first time saw clearly in his eyes a loss that had never healed. Not the kind of loss someone can cry out and eventually ease, but an emptiness that lingers quietly, the way an untouched wall remains bare because no one dares to hang anything there again. I set my hand on the back of his, saying nothing, just letting it rest lightly. Damien looked at my hand, then gently tightened his fingers. He began sharing small stories about his mother, not in order, as if each memory were a door swinging open at random. The time she made him finish an entire plate of greens, simply because he said he hated the color. The afternoon she walked with him for miles just to buy an old book he loved from a dusty little shop near the docks. The 4th of July night they sat on the roof together watching fireworks from a distance because they could not afford tickets to the stadium. As he spoke, I did not interrupt. I simply listened. And in every detail he gave, I no longer saw Damien Blackwood, the man behind clandestine deals, the figure federal agents watched with caution. I saw a boy who once dreamed of being a writer, who sketched his mother on the walls with pencil, who cried himself empty in a dark corner the night the hospital called. When the sky deepened toward dusk, Damien took the notebook back, slipped it into his pocket, then turned to me. "Thank you for listening," I smiled. "Thank you for telling me." We stood and walked the narrow path back toward the house by the sea. Our shadows stretched long across the sand, quiet but side by side. In that moment I realized something unnamed had begun to take shape between us. Not quite love, not anything that demanded promises, just an understanding that needed no explanation. A quiet bond, deepening, becoming harder and harder to untangle. That night, after we ate dinner beneath the soft golden glow of the porch lights, neither of us wanted to leave the space we shared. It was not the food or the wine or the ocean breeze, but the gentle stillness between two people who had once carried too much armor and now found themselves able to breathe even in silence. Damien rose first, saying he would light the fireplace in the living room because the air had grown colder. I followed him inside, my bare feet touching the cool wooden floor, each step drawing me a little closer to something I could not yet name. The flames rose slowly, casting shifting ribbons of light onto the rough stone wall, illuminating Damien's face as he knelt to arrange the wood. I sat on the thick wool rug, wrapped in a thin blanket, watching him as if trying to memorize each quiet movement. When he settled down beside me, the space between us narrowed to a breath. I could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing, feel the warmth radiating through his shirt. His hand rested close to mine, not touching, but close enough to make its presence feel like an invitation. I turned toward him, and my gaze met his for a fleeting second that stretched like a long-held exhale finally released. He asked if I was cold. I shook my head. I wasn't sure whether it was the fire or him, but the chill had slipped away. He did not say another word. Instead, he lifted his hand and brushed a loose strand of hair from my cheek. His fingers paused there, then traveled, gently down to my jaw, lingering as if waiting for me to choose. I did not pull away. I did not speak. I simply closed my eyes, and in that moment his lips touched mine soft, unhurried, tender, as if any sudden movement might break the quiet spell holding us in place. The kiss was not urgent or wild, but it carried a rising wave of emotion, the kind that comes from waiting too long for something uncertain. He placed his hand on my back, drawing me closer, and I let myself lean into him as if every doubt had melted out of my bones. When he pressed slow kisses along my neck and shoulder, each movement deliberate and careful, I understood he did not want only my body, he wanted trust. He wanted me to know that his touch was not possession or control, but the deliberate act of a man laying down the last piece of his armor. We left the living room when the fire had burned low, walking hand in hand to the bedroom without needing any words. In the dim light of the small lamp by the bed, Damien touched me the way someone reads a beloved poem, familiar yet moved every time by its truth. Each gesture carried a gentleness I never expected from a man the world thought of as cold and dangerous. We did not say love. We made no promises. There were only breaths mingling, hearts beating steady and close, and a fragile feeling so delicate it seemed it might vanish if we did not hold it carefully. When he wrapped his arms around me from behind, drawing me against his chest, I felt no fear. I did not feel like someone being shielded or kept safe. I felt like a missing part of a quiet space he had spent years trying to protect. We did not sleep much that night, but when I drifted into sleep in Damien's arms, my head resting over his heartbeat, I knew that for the first time in many years, I had fallen asleep inside a true peace. No midnight knocks, no fear of who might be watching, no tension at the edges of my breath. Only two people who had lost too much, finding one another, in the tender silence of a long night. I woke to find the sun already rising above the ocean, its shimmering light slipping through the thin white curtain and spreading a warm, gentle glow across my skin. Damien was still beside me, his arm draped around my waist in an instinctive gesture, holding me as if loosening his grip might cause me to disappear. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, his hair tousled across his forehead, his face softened in sleep, almost unrecognizable from the man who once terrified me the first time we met. I lay still for a moment, unwilling to disturb the fragile quiet, unwilling to let anything wedge itself between us. But like a cruel stroke of fate, Damien's phone vibrated once on the bedside table, faint yet undeniable. His eyes opened instantly, not startled, not confused, but with the calm readiness of someone accustomed to sleep being interrupted by shadows from the world outside. He sat up, reached for the phone, and the pale glow of the screen lit the blend of gentleness and tension on his face. I watched the change in his eyes happen within seconds, shifting from composed to contemplative, then to something far more grave. He did not speak at first. He simply set the phone down, turned toward me, and his gaze softened as if he were trying to cushion whatever news had just arrived. I pushed myself upright, my heart tightening even before I knew the reason. "Is something wrong?" Damien nodded slightly, his voice dropping low enough to thicken the air around us. "They know we're here." I didn't need to ask who. The answer rose immediately and sharply in my mind. "The federal agents." My throat went dry. How did they find us? Damien shook his head as he slipped on his shirt, his attention moving through possibilities faster than he could speak them. It could be a phone signal, or someone who was being followed before. "It's possible they tagged you back in Seattle." His voice held no accusation, only analysis, but guilt still pricked at me like a needle. I tightened my grip on the bedsheet and forced myself to stay steady. Damien walked back to me, sat down in front of me, his hand resting on my knee, his eyes filled with a quiet regret. "We might have a few hours, maybe less." I prepared for this possibility, but I didn't think it would come so soon. I looked at him. There was no panic in his expression, only resolve. And beneath that resolve I saw something far more painful. A man long accustomed to leaving places behind, to letting go, to living with one foot forever in the dark. I drew in a deep breath. "What happens now?" Damien rose and moved to a small cabinet in the corner, pulling out a medium suitcase and placing a few necessary items inside. His voice came without him turning fully toward me. "We leave this place in half an hour. There's a helicopter waiting about 10 miles from here, on an abandoned farm. From there we're out of the state, maybe Canada first, and after that, I'll handle the rest." I slid out of bed and stepped beside him, my heart racing but my mind unnervingly clear. "You're really planning to take me with you?" Damien looked at me for the first time since the message arrived. "If you want to stay, I won't stop you. I can get you a lawyer, a solid story, something that keeps you protected. But if you go with me, you need to understand there won't be a return to your old life for a long time, and everything from here on out will be different." I looked at him, the man who had spent the night showing me the gentlest side of himself, now ready to abandon everything to keep me safe. I knew I wasn't ready, but I also knew that walking away now would mean losing something I could never replace. Damien placed a hand on my shoulder, as light as if he feared breaking me. "You don't have to decide this second." "But we don't have much time." I nodded and stepped outside to the balcony, gazing at the sea one last time. The waves kept rising and, falling, the sky stayed a clear blue, but inside me everything was shifting. A new chapter had begun to open, and I would have to choose whether to enter it with Damien or step back into what used to be my life. The ocean wind blew harder as I stood there, my hair tangling in the gusts, my heart pounding so fiercely it felt ready to escape my ribs. I heard Damien behind me, the soft thud of a zipper, the muted tap of his shoes on the wooden floor, every small sound carrying the weight of urgency. When he joined me, holding 2 cups of freshly brewed coffee, one for me and one for himself, his eyes gentled but the determination beneath them did not waver. He handed me my cup, the rising steam blurring the reflection on the glass railing. For several seconds he said nothing, standing beside me as if listening to the sea for some kind of answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and deliberate. "Emily, you still have a chance to walk away. You can leave me now, and I'll make sure you have a clean life, unburdened by anything connected to my past. You'll be safe, and I won't ever come back into your life, if that's what you want." I turned toward him, my breath slowing. "And if I don't want to leave?" Damien met my gaze, and the look in his eyes was no longer cold like the day we first met, but filled with a fear he could no longer hide. "If you stay, it means going with me. Leaving everything familiar behind. No old apartment, no job at the bar, no quiet mornings in the city or the comfort of a predictable life. You'll live in the shadows for a while, moving often, staying cautious. I can't promise happiness, but I swear I'll do everything I can so you don't regret choosing me." I held his eyes, seeing the hurt of a man who had been left behind too many times. He was giving me a choice, but he was also bracing for loss. He wasn't begging, wasn't pleading. He was standing at a crossroads with me and respecting whichever path I would take, even if it fractured him. I turned back to the ocean again. The sky stayed bright. The waves kept rolling without hesitation. And as I watched them, I thought of my mother, my brother, the countless times I had chosen safety because I was too afraid of the unknown. Then I thought of Damien, of how he had allowed me to be myself, without pressure or manipulation, of how he touched me last night as if I were the last fragile thing he wanted to keep in this world. I inhaled deeply, set my coffee cup down, then faced him fully. I don't want to live a life where every morning I wake up wondering, what if? I don't want to remember you as something unfinished. I don't want to run away from something just because it doesn't promise certainty. You may not promise happiness, but you've given me something just as rare. The feeling of being seen, of being trusted. And I'm not losing that out of fear. Damien didn't speak right away. He only looked at me, and slowly his eyes filled with the quiet shine of a man who had forgotten how to hope and was suddenly given a reason to remember. He stepped forward, pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly it felt as if he feared the wind would take me from him. His voice came rough, thickened by emotion. "Then from this moment on, we don't look back." I nodded and pressed my face against his chest, feeling his heart racing, wild and raw, painfully genuine. We stayed there for several minutes, letting the wind tangle my hair, letting the world outside collapse in layers if it wished. Inside his arms, I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't uncertain. Whatever lay ahead, I had chosen. I had chosen him. I pulled out my phone as Damien stepped into the other room to double-check our route, the screen lighting up in my damp palm, even though the air drifting in from the ocean was cool against the glass balcony doors. My fingers trembled slightly as I dialed Zachary's number, and the line rang 3 times before his voice came through, groggy with sleep, yet tinged with worry. "You're calling early. Is everything okay?" I forced my voice to stay steady, shaping a small smile he couldn't see. "I just wanted to hear your voice for a moment, and I need you to help me with something." Zachary hesitated only long enough to wake fully. Then his tone shifted, serious in the quiet way he had always reserved for the things that mattered. "Tell me, what is it?" I stepped outside onto the balcony, my eyes drifting over the wide open sea, and finally spoke. "How's Mom doing these days?" He exhaled softly. "The same, mostly. She forgets things sometimes, but she's been in a better mood lately. I take her on walks every afternoon. She talks about the old days. She mentions you a lot." I swallowed the tight ache rising in my throat. "That's good. I need you to take care of her for me for a while. Not forever, but I won't be able to call often. I may have to leave the city, start something new." Zachary fell silent. It was the first time I had ever heard him simply listen, without questions, without trying to guess. Then his voice returned, gentle but steady. "Are you in danger?" I pressed my lips together, then answered softly, "No. Not if I know what I'm doing. And I believe I'm moving in the right direction. I just need some time to begin again." Zachary's silence shifted, warm with trust. "I believe you. I'll take care of Mom. Just don't disappear for too long. You've always been the person I tried to catch up to, so wherever you're going, when you look back, I want you to still be you." A quiet laugh slipped out of me as tears blurred my vision. "Thank you. I'll call when I can. Hug Mom for me, And don't tell her anything that might worry her. Just say I'm on a long work trip." He murmured an okay, then hung up. I stayed there for a moment, staring at the sky turning a soft gray, the scent of salt growing heavier on the breeze. When Damien came out and saw the phone trembling in my hand, he didn't ask a single question. He simply pulled me against his chest with a careful strength. "Are you all right?" I nodded into him. "I talked to Zachary. He understands. Mom will be taken care of. I'm ready now." Damien didn't speak, only tightened his arms around me. He knew how hard this choice was for me. But he also knew I was the only person he wanted beside him on the road ahead. When I lifted my face to him, for the first time I wasn't afraid, wasn't a passive body carried by a storm. I was choosing this with both my feet and my heart. He brushed a kiss against my forehead, then laced his fingers with mine and guided me inside. The suitcases were ready. My phone was powered off. Every trace of me had been erased. The house looked unchanged, neat and serene, giving nothing away of the escape beginning within its walls. But I knew that when the door closed behind me, I would no longer be the Emily I used to be, and Damien was no longer the darkness I once mistook him for. Within hours, everything familiar would be behind us, and only the unknown would remain. Yet I felt no regret. For the first time in my life, I had chosen something unsafe, and it made me feel alive. The black SUV rolled quietly away from the coastal road, its tires crunching over fine gravel in the pale morning light. I sat in the back seat, gripping the handle of my suitcase, watching the roadside trees fall away like pieces of a life slipping out of reach. Damien sat beside me, his gaze fixed straight ahead, his face calm but his fingers tapping lightly on his knee, as though running through 1,000 possible outcomes. Neither of us spoke. It wasn't silence born of emptiness, but of too many thoughts, too many fears, too much truth sitting between us. When the car turned onto a narrow path choked with dust and wild grass, I knew we were close. In the distance, the helicopter blades had already begun to rotate, the rising hum carrying the weight of an approaching future. The pilot greeted Damien with a small nod and moved to check the luggage. Damien turned to me, his expression unreadable except for the quiet way he extended his hand. I took it and stepped out of the vehicle with him. The wind from the blades grew stronger, lifting my hair, stripping away the last threads of doubt. As we climbed aboard, the door clanged shut behind us like a period closing the sentence of a life we would not revisit soon. I sat by the window and watched the ground pull away, the trees shrinking into green specks, the houses dissolving into soft outlines, until all that remained were the blurred streaks of blue and gray, the sea and the mountains, the past and the horizon. Damien leaned toward me, saying something the roar of the engine swallowed whole. I only saw the movement of his lips and the unwavering certainty in his eyes, and in that certainty, I knew I wasn't alone. My thoughts churned beneath the thunder of the rotors. Where was I going? Why did I trust this man so much? Would this be the mistake I regretted forever? Or the one turning point I had needed without knowing it? Yet beneath all those questions there was something steadier, quieter, a strange sense of freedom that came with letting go, a feeling of stepping beyond the small invisible fence of safety I had lived behind for years, into something wider, riskier, but undeniably real. Damien held my hand the entire flight. His hand was warm, steady, the kind of grip that said more than any promise could. I knew he wasn't a man who shared easily or built futures out of pretty words. But I also knew that if he let me walk beside him, he would not let go lightly. We flew over dense forests, then low mountain ridges draped in morning mist. The land below shifted into a patchwork of green and shadow, nothing like Malibu, nothing like any life I had known, but something waiting nonetheless. As the helicopter began to descend, Damien leaned closer, his voice carrying over the fading roar. "Are you all right?" I turned toward him and smiled, my eyes still damp. I've never been certain of anything in my life, but right now, I know I made the right choice. He nodded, squeezing my hand just a little more. When the blades finally slowed, and the wind softened, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. There was no path backward, only the beginning of something new, and I would walk into it with Damien, without looking behind me. The city where we landed wasn't one of those marked boldly on a map, but a quiet seaside town in the south of France where terracotta rooftops dipped along the hills and church bells drifted through the morning air. Damien had chosen it because it was far enough to lose our tracks, small enough not to attract attention, and beautiful enough to make anyone believe new beginnings were possible without explanation. We rented a small apartment overlooking the bay, the second floor of an old stone building with curved iron balconies and bougainvillea vines sweeping across the railings. Every morning I made coffee, opened the windows to let the sea breeze rush in, and watched the townspeople pull their carts to the market, greeting one another in quick, musical French that sounded like running water. At first everything felt foreign. I wasn't used to stepping outside without glancing over my shoulder, without checking cameras or fearing an unfamiliar gaze. But Damien told me we needed time to relearn how to live like ordinary people. And slowly, I began to believe him. He kept his promise to change. No more midnight calls, no more aliases or secret meetings, no shadows trailing after him. Damien opened a small business importing and exporting local goods, completely legal, hiring local workers and paying taxes like any other man trying to build a clean life. He studied French every evening with the focus of a first-year student, and although his accent remained stiff, there was a new openness in his expression when he interacted with others. As for me, I enrolled in a short pastry course at a vocational school near the square. At first it was only to fill the hours, but I soon discovered a quiet joy in creating things soft and sweet, so different from the sharp clinking of cocktail shakers behind a bar. I learned to knead dough, read the oven's temperament, distinguish between almond flour and simple wheat flour, small things, gentle things, but they pulled me toward a peace I had forgotten I could feel. Many afternoons I brought pastries home in a woven basket, setting them on the kitchen counter and watching Damien smile as he bit into the first madeleine, always finishing it even when it was too dry or too sweet. He said anything I made existed for a reason. We didn't talk much about the past. We stored it away, not locked, but set on a high shelf we no longer reached for. Only at night, lying beside him with moonlight filtering through the open window, did I sometimes see an old grief flicker through Damien's eyes like the fleeting shadow of a passing bird. I never asked. We learned to let sorrow exist without trying to erase it. The little town became home in a gentle, almost inevitable way. The florist remembered my name. The baker kept aside my favorite pastry every Friday. Children kicking a ball in the street knew to scatter when I rode my bicycle through. No one cared who we were, and no one needed to. We were Emily and Damien, the couple living on the second floor, the ones who walked every evening, who shared vanilla ice cream and laughed over the last spoonful. That life, simple and temporary, was something I never believed I could have. But now, in the still days of soft wind and salt-scented air, I began to believe that sometimes a new beginning doesn't require rebuilding everything. It only asks you to begin with yourself. And this time, I wasn't alone. I realized I had changed on a quiet morning like any other, standing in front of the mirror, with flour still clinging to my fingers, and my hair tied up loosely by the silk scarf Damien had given me on a day that had no name. There was no alarm, no shock, no sudden event, only the simple truth that I was seeing myself differently. The eyes in the reflection no longer held the lost expression I had carried in Seattle, no longer belonged to the exhausted girl behind the bar pretending she was fine in a world full of people yet offering no place to lean on. Now I saw a woman whose gaze was steadier not because life had become easy, but because she had learned to accept what could not be controlled and still found the strength to keep moving. I thought about what I had done. I had chosen to walk away from safety, to abandon the only job that had ever supported my family, to leave my mother and my younger brother behind to follow a man I had only begun to understand after risking my life to warn him with a message scribbled on a napkin. That decision might have been the reckless thing I had ever done, or perhaps it was the bravest, and now, looking back, I did not regret it. I had learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the act of stepping toward it with trembling legs and refusing to stop. I had learned how to love someone who was imperfect, someone with a tangled past and many shadows, yet someone who kept his word, who listened, and who never used love as a weight to carry. Damien was not a man of promises, but every day he showed me he chose to stay. I learned to trust that choice, even without paperwork, without marriage, without any binding force except our willingness. I also learned to trust myself. I had once believed I was weak, the kind of person who avoided conflict, who chose the easiest path as long as everyone else stayed safe. But now I understood that sometimes, to protect others, you must be strong for yourself first. I had learned to live without depending on circumstance, without being shaped by expectations. In this unfamiliar town, I had become someone new, not the Emily from the bar, but a woman who knew exactly what she was doing each time she stepped into the kitchen, each time she spoke shaky French to strangers, each time she met Damien's eyes and felt no fear of the future. Sometimes I still dreamt of Seattle, of car horns and the warm yellow light of my old apartment, of my mother calling my name through the phone. But in those dreams I no longer woke with my heart pounding. I simply smiled, as though saying goodbye to a version of myself that had lived fully and was now ready to rest. Damien once told me I walked like someone who carried her own gravity, no longer shifting from place to place, searching for balance. I laughed and told him he was being too poetic, but I understood what he meant. I had found my center. I no longer needed anyone to affirm my worth, nor did I fear losing someone so much that I forgot to keep myself whole. And strangely, once I stopped clinging and stopped fearing everything that could break, love grew like a stubborn seedling, rooting itself through every small crack and rising stronger. I did not know what tomorrow would bring. Damien could still be hunted down, and I could still be forced to leave this place again. But if that day came, I knew I would not run. I would walk forward with my hand in his, not because there were no other choices, but because I had made mine, and I was strong enough to see it through. Later that afternoon, the wind shifted and the sky gathered in pale gray layers like the first whisper of a new season. Damien and I sat on the porch where the bougainvillea vines had begun to shed their blossoms, a few petals drifting across the tiles with each passing gust. He was brewing tea, and I was folding napkins that had dried in the sun, placing them into a woven basket for dinner. Among them was one in a soft ivory shade, the edges slightly worn, the stitching frayed. I touched it lightly, as though afraid to disrupt the memory woven into its fabric. Damien noticed but didn't speak at first. He only poured the tea and sat beside me, his gaze resting on the napkin lying across my lap. "You kept it." I nodded, smiling even as something tightened in my chest. How could I throw it away? That was the moment everything began to change. A hurried warning written on a piece of cloth amidst clinking glasses, loud music, and watchful eyes. A small gesture, but enough to save a life and open another. Damien picked it up, turning it over in his fingers as though rereading the words he had once seen. "They know you're here. Run." He repeated it from memory, each word quiet and deliberate, before placing it gently on the table. "You know, when I first saw that message, I thought you were just a reckless waitress. But in that moment, I also knew you were unlike anyone I had ever met." I looked at him, my eyes softening. I never expected to write it, but when I saw you that night, something in me knew I had to do something. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was something in your eyes. Damien smiled, the sun catching in his lashes as the last light filtered through the leaves. Our life together began with a napkin. One small act, honest in a place full of lies and danger. And from that, everything impossible slowly became real. Sometimes love doesn't come from sweet confessions or expensive gifts, but from quiet courage, from a glance deep enough to see the loneliness in someone else, from a decision made not for safety but because it was true. I leaned my head on his shoulder, gratitude spreading warm and full inside me, grateful that I didn't turn back, grateful that I found the courage to choose the path fewer people take, grateful that in all the darkness, I had found a love imperfect yet real. Our story is not a gentle love song. It is the journey of two people who had been hurt, who had been frightened, who had once believed there was no place left in the world for them. But, somehow, we found each other not to hide, but to face everything and grow. Thank you for staying with us until this moment. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with those you love. How do you feel about that napkin? Have you ever experienced a life-changing moment born from a small act? Leave a comment below. We would truly love to read your honest thoughts. Every word you share is the inspiration that helps us continue telling stories that reach deep into the heart. Wishing you good health, a peaceful life, and days filled with kindness, love, and meaning. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.